All right, so today I want to review the client. So some aspects of this are going to be really simple. So basic info will be put into the system. As it pertains to the job order, when the job order gets put into the system, there could be an additional location. Make sure I spell it right. There could be additional location or locations associated with the job order. So the corporate office may be Dallas, Texas, but they have 5 satellite locations. So the job order is going to have to be able to support the introduction of job-specific addresses. Inside of the job order, we're going to have a data bank of skills. And these skills are going to pertain to just about everything across the board. We don't want the client to be able to add skills. We want to control that at our level, where the call it the super user with the VMS office, basically employees of Staff Elements, would be able to add skills, because we want them to stay as close to consistent as possible. And I just need to know if there's a skills database out there that we could look at, or if this is something that we're going to have to start building. And so I need the team to respond to me on the database, and then the add feature inside of the job order. So the job order is simplistic as it needs to be. I don't want a whole lot of detail, and I want the job order to also to have templates. And inside of these templates, let's say for instance it's for a registered nurse. The registered nurse template could be the exact same if it's for a staff nurse. So they say staff nurse with these skills. If it's consistent within this client's within their job order space, then they're going to just put in, they could just select one of the templates. It can have the rate information, the job description, and it can have the specific skills as it relates to a staff nurse. Now they can add templates, so they need to have the ability to add templates and modify templates. So that and this would be universal across all managers inside of the client, on the client side. So if manager 1 wants to add a nursing template and manager 2 wants to add a similar nursing template, they could feed off of each other, they could share each other's templates, they could have one universal template and then build their own under that manager, or so on and so forth. So this is extremely important, and it allows I want as close to a one-click functionality as we can get. If they go in and the client says, I need to create a job order for, look at my templates, select the staff nurse template. It's going to already have these skills built in. It's going to have the database associated with said skills. It's going to have the location based on where that manager sits. But if the manager presides over multiple locations, they should have the ability to change the location. Anyway, grab the template, make it a live job order. And once the job order is made live, all the skills are put in, the locations already selected, it ends up, the job order itself at this point goes to the VMS, essentially the VMS office or the VMS approver, okay? So what is controlled at the VMS level, or at our level as Staff Elements, is going to be approving this based on what the client's parameters are at a macro level, okay? So if the client said, we have certain requirements for approval for anything that's outside of a certain pay rate range, like if it's 10% above market or 20% above market, that's what's going to be eyeballed here at this level. If it's a basic run-of-the-mill, already pre-approved template that's already in the system, identical to everything else that's been put into the system, this should be a very quick process. It comes to us, we get an email that client 123, manager John Doe released a job order for a staff nurse, we approve it unless there's some abnormality. So this will, inside of this job order, obviously there will be, I guess I need another arrow here. There will be rates that are already predetermined or pre-approved in the master level contract with the client. And there has to be room for some flexibility in that. So I don't believe in the first iteration that we deploy, we're gonna have it tightened up that specifically. If the client releases a job order and it's a rate of, $55 an hour, which is significantly above the standard rate for a staff nurse, if that's what they want to pay, we're going to post it out there. But in future iterations for cost containment and cost control, if the client stipulates we have a maximum rate for this level of candidate, we're going to want to have the ability, not in the beginning, but down the road, to put some sort of filter in place that doesn't reject it as a job order, but notifies the manager, you need approval from whoever their boss is, you need approval to go outside of the standardized rate. So that we can, again, one of the purposes behind a vendor management system is rate control, right? We want to control the rate statically within the client's environment, and we also want to be able to control that rate as it relates to the staffing companies. So one thing that is important to note, that up here above the client level, eventually we'll get to rate caps. But what we will have, and we will have to have built in, is going to be staffing company rate conversion. And what I mean by that is when the staffing company signs up with Staff Elements to be a provider of contractor level services, there's going to be a rate associated with all contractors. And that rate is going to be set, period. And that rate's not going to have deviation unless we get approval above that. And here's what I mean. If somebody's going to be paid $30 an hour, and this is the rate for the contractor, it's going to have an automatic conversion of, let's say in this example, of 1.5. If the rate in the industry is bearing 1.5, this means that, so this is the pay rate, and then the bill rate conversion equals 1.5. When that job order is released, the bill rate will be $45 an hour. Okay, so if the client says, I'm expecting this person to come in at a pay rate range of between $20 and $30 an hour, so if they say $20 to $30 an hour, it will give a bill rate range of, so 1.5, quick, $30, 30, 35? 30 to 45 an hour is what's going to be released to the staffing companies when the job order is put in the system. So the manager will have what they anticipate the compensation to be for these nurses. Okay. Now, whatever they hire them for out through the staffing company, everybody knows the game. You get them for as cheap as you can. You put them in for as much as you can, and you make as much out of the spread as you can possibly make. That's their deal. So, all of this then will eventually feed into. So once the VMS approves it, it gets launched out to the staffing companies. Okay. So it's live, and the staffing companies have the information. They can start matching candidates based on some of the the candidate parameters that I shared with in the last stages of videos. the job order is now live and in the system, so candidates can start being matched. So this goes to a whole new level with once the job order is live, candidates get matched, and over time, and candidates have been accepted, there's a process in the job order that has to take place that's important to note for time tracking. Well, first of all, there's the interview process, which I'll go over. So when a candidate gets selected against the job order, then the first stage of the interview process relative to what the client prefers, it's either going to be a Zoom interview or Microsoft Teams or whatever the interview platform is from a video perspective. That'll be one stage of the interview process. Then there could be a second stage or a third stage, could be a face-to-face. There could be as many interview stages as necessary inside of the job order. And the client can select them, and then after each one is completed, they can say, does candidate John Doe need to be interviewed, have a second interview or a third interview? Or once the interview is complete, they can hire them. They can accept the candidate. And then an accept notification goes out to the staffing company, and then the completion of the candidate procurement, job interview, and matching process is complete. The candidate's now going to be in the client's database as a live candidate working against whatever contract number it's relative to the job order. And from there, we will have time tracking. So this is basically the time card. And there will be approval components to this. So that's one aspect of the time card. And then the time card will eventually yield an invoice. Now, if we just take it as from, if the client only hires one person, we can step through this whole process with, against this job order, there's time tracking in the candidate. Eventually what I'd like to have is a time tracking app. They check in, clock out, clock in, clock out through an app that has got a geofence around it that allows for the candidate to clock in, but they can't clock in unless they're on site, okay? So ultimately, the time tracking has to be approved. So as a candidate is working on that job order, let's just say, again, going back to the staff nurse example, they're working at a hospital in labor and delivery, and they clock in at 7 in the morning, they clock out at 7 p.m. They also have a clock in, clock out for lunch if the client forces them to clock out for lunch. If not, they clock in at 7, and they clock out again at 7 p.m. We can have the system set to where at a certain number of hours or days of the week, whichever is best, and I don't know the answer to that yet. But the start of the week is going to be Sunday through Saturday. So all hours amassed in this window will be sent to the manager for approval. So the manager approves it, it then goes to invoicing. So every single week, hours are gonna have to be approved. And we have some other components that are important. For instance, if a client, or if a candidate rather, clocks in when they get to a client location and they haven't clocked out. Let's say they forget to clock out and they leave. There's other pieces of this, and we're going to drill down to that as we get to the building of the time tracking system. But one thing that's important is if I clock in and I forget to clock out, or I clock in, or I'm sorry, I don't clock in, and then my shift's over and I'm like, oh, I need to clock out, but oh my gosh, I didn't clock in. There's going to be some features inside of the app for their phone to be able to go back in time and clock themselves in, which will require an approval from the manager. And if they forget to clock out, there's going to be a window of time that we will calculate back to 7 p.m. If a candidate hasn't clocked out, they're going to get a notification after their shift ends. You know, Jane Doe, did you complete your shift at XYZ hospital? And they're like, oh yeah, I did, and I forgot to clock out. They can clock out, they can go back in time and clock out and put a note. But the system's gonna recognize from the job order what their shifts are. And if this is, you know, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, static, always these 3 days, it's not a per diem where he or she's working whatever pickup shifts. If it's static in the job order, then the system will be able to recognize this. But if the client then goes in and puts them in for an additional shift, whenever they're put in for an additional shift that's picked up by the time tracking, the system will notate and then ask the candidate, hey, did you show up for your shift? Yes or no? Yes. And it's like, do you need to go back in time and clock in? Or vice versa, did you forget to clock out? You can go back in time and clock out, right? And then that will also flag the manager so they can notate or ask the other staff members, hey, was Jane Doe here? Or hey, did Jane Doe stay till 7? And just, you know, allows for human error to exist. So once it's been approved by the manager, inside of the system, it gets coded into invoicing. And there's a mechanism here that will have to be available to the staffing company to pull invoices every week. Now that doesn't have anything to do with payment on the client side, and I need to be clear on this. Staffing companies oftentimes have to draw down on a line of credit to pay their staff each week. And in this model, they're gonna pay every single week. So the client in this VMS engagement will actually pay a master invoice once a month. And we'll get into the nuances of the invoice later, but the staffing company is gonna have to be able to draw down on that line of credit, so they're gonna have to generate an invoice and see what their billables and what their receivables are going to be for that particular week, so they can transmit it to their finance company. So I'm sure we'll have questions about this, and we can go into that when we're on our call. So each week they're gonna be able to at least produce what their invoice looks like for week 1 through day 1 through day 7, then day 8 through so on and so forth on down the line. And then one master invoice at the end of the month is actually reconciled with all the job orders for all the candidates at this client location, and they're billed one time. And the system generates that billable one time. So that client's not gonna receive, if they have 40 contractors on site, they're not gonna get 40 bills. All 40 contractors will be on one master invoice, and that master invoice is gonna have job order number, candidate name, location, rate, hours, and down here's the total. This is gonna be the total for the month. This is not, now when the invoice is pulled for basically a snapshot copy of what your invoice looks like from a staffing company perspective, you can pull it for any date range you want. They can pull it for a week, they can pull it for the last 2 weeks, they can pull it for the month, whatever they want to do, so that they can actually factor their receivables or finance their receivables. But at the end of the month, when this is all produced, it's going to have the job order, candidate name, location, rate, and hours, and the total here. Now, what I would like for this to be is a hyperlinked document, okay? So this is all, it's all online. There's nothing printed. When this invoice is produced, when they click on this job order, on here, we want it to be able to give manager name and other pertinent details that can be captured on this line. Otherwise, the information that would be readily available from here wouldn't be on this line. This would just be like a drop down showing you what other details are on here. So if you look at this and there's 167 hours for a particular candidate, and if you were auditing it at the client level, you may look at this and go, how's a nurse working 167 hours? Let me check with this manager and make sure the manager's not like just approving everybody's hours and not reviewing timesheets properly, so on and so forth. But it's more of an auditing tool for clients to have at their availability. So once the job order is created, candidates ultimately are matched, candidates are then interviewed, candidates are then accepted, the rest of the candidates are rejected. The candidates that are accepted, the next component to them will be obviously the start and working on the assignment, and their time will be collected in our time tracking tool, and ultimately an invoicing component that the staffing company can look at on a weekly basis, but ultimately a master invoice that gets paid by the client every month. And it's gonna be based on the first of the month to the last day of the month, and the last day of the month it's gonna close. And I know oftentimes that could happen in the middle of the week, right smack in the middle of a pay cycle. So if we try to reconcile based on pay periods, it's gonna become a nightmare. So the most simplistic nightmare between the two nightmares is to just open the month at January 1st, close the month January 31st, even if it's in the middle of the week. So you'll have a candidate is gonna get paid at the end of that week based on whatever they're doing, but the staffing company may not get paid the last 2 days of the week or 3 days of the week if the month closes in the middle of the week. And that's usually fairly minimal in terms of dollars allocated. So so this should get us at least through the basics, and we'll drill down into some more detail, especially with the invoicing piece, either on a call or a later discussion. And certainly the time tracking piece. Understand that this is going to be a 24-hour time tracking. A lot of our facilities that we work with are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So there's going to be SD is for shift differential. People that work nights. We're also going to have holiday pay, and we may have weekend pay. So we'll have variations, and they'll all come back to the job order and have some specifics in there. And again, on call, we can drill down specifically. Like at this job order, they know they're gonna work 7P to 7A, so 7 at night to 7 in the morning. They're gonna have shift differential built into their hourly time. And then if they have holiday pay, they're gonna notate that they're gonna pay that out at time and a half. If they have weekend pay, they may have that billed out at a different rate. So if you're working Monday through Friday, 7A to 7P, you're gonna get the baseline rate. If you're working night shift, weekend nights, holidays, your rate can be different. And then we're also gonna have overtime. So all of these pieces will be built in, and they should be able to be picked up automatically within the system. And it's gonna go back to the original agreement with the client, how they recognize overtime. And I'll give you, for instance, in the state of California, if you work 8 hours, you get paid your straight time. If in that same day, you exceed 8 hours, for every hour you exceed, you get paid time and a half. And we'll have to have the ability to manage that level of expectation for states like California that require a beyond 8 hour time and a half calculation. So we can go into that in greater detail on a future call. All right, so that's client detail.